When my son-in-law told me to pack my things and leave my own house, he said it with the confidence of a man who thought he owned the world. My daughter stood behind him silent, letting him humiliate me under the roof I built with my own hands. But what they didn't know was that the house was never theirs to claim, and the person I chose to give it to would turn their entire world upside down. Hit subscribe if you believe life always finds a way to balance the scales. Because this story proves it. I had always believed that a home is more than just walls and a roof. It's where life leaves its footprints, where memories linger in the furniture, and laughter echoes long after the rooms fall silent. My house was that place for me. Every corner held a story, every picture on the walls a chapter of my life. And I had lived a long life in this house, raising my daughter here, hosting countless family dinners, and seeing her grow into the woman I was proud of. But that feeling of security, of belonging, would vanish in the span of a single afternoon because of someone I trusted, someone who called himself family. It started as any ordinary Friday. I had just finished my morning coffee, looking out the window at the garden I had painstakingly nurtured over decades. The roses were in full bloom, their fragrance carried by the gentle breeze into my study. I had just picked up my daughter's letter. She was away on a business trip and was reading about her latest achievements. When my son-in-law arrived, I could hear the crunch of his shoes on the gravel driveway before I even opened the door. Something about his footsteps, quick and purposeful, sent a strange chill down my spine, but I brushed it off. After all, he often stopped by unexpectedly. "Hey, Dad," he said. A thin smile plastered across his face. I offered a polite nod, though I felt an uneasy tension. It was only when he stepped fully inside and looked around the living room with an air of mild disdain that I realized this wasn't going to be a simple visit. The way he scanned the space, noting the furniture, the pictures, and the shelves, almost as if appraising them, made my skin crawl. "Nice place," he said casually, but his tone lacked warmth. "But, Dad, I think it's time you consider moving on. You know, my parents are moving in next week, and well, you're just too old for this house." For a moment, the words didn't fully register. I blinked, unsure if I had heard him correctly. "Excuse me?" I asked, my voice a little louder than intended. "You heard me," he said, leaning back against the doorframe with a self-satisfied smirk. "I mean, no offense, but it's kind of obvious, isn't it? You're retired, barely get out of the house, and honestly, it's time for you to step aside." I felt my heart drop into my stomach. I could feel every beat of it pounding against my ribs as anger, disbelief, and hurt collided inside me. He was my daughter's husband. He was supposed to respect me, to treat this house as a home we all shared, not claim ownership over it like a conqueror surveying a newly seized territory. And yet, here he was, dismissing years of my life as if they were nothing. I wanted to yell. I wanted to throw the first thing I could grab at him and tell him exactly how disrespectful he was. But I didn't. I had learned over the years that anger is a dangerous tool when wielded without control. I let him finish, keeping my voice steady, though every fiber in me trembled with indignation. "My parents are moving in next week," he continued, almost gleeful now, enjoying the discomfort he was causing. "So, you know, maybe it's time to find a smaller place, somewhere more suitable for someone your age." I stared at him, trying to comprehend the audacity. "Your parents, moving in. Did you think to ask me, or even warn me? This is my house. I built this home with my wife. I raised my daughter here. And you." I paused, swallowing the lump in my throat. "You think you can just decide it's time for me to leave?" He shrugged, as if my words were meaningless. "It's just practical, Dad. Nothing personal. You'd be happier in a condo, or maybe near your friends. You'd feel less out of place. I felt a wave of disbelief wash over me. Less out of place. Out of place in my own home. He spoke with such casual cruelty, as though years of memories, laughter, and even sorrow in this house could be disregarded as easily as old newspapers. I wanted to tell him that he had no idea what he was talking about, that respect isn't something earned by moving into a place. It's something given to those who have nurtured life within it. But words seemed insufficient. I let him talk a little longer, trying to maintain my composure, while he casually walked through the living room, inspecting the furniture like he was an inspector. I watched his eyes linger on the corner where my late wife's piano stood. She had taught my daughter to play there. I felt a sting of sadness mix with anger. Could he not see the history, the love, or did it simply not matter to him? By the time he finished his self-satisfied inspection, I was simmering. I thanked him for visiting, though my tone was cold, and watched him leave. Once the door clicked shut, I walked slowly to the window and looked out at the garden. The roses smelled sweeter than ever, but they could not mask the bitterness rising in me. My house, my sanctuary, had been insulted, and I knew I could not let this stand. I spent that night awake, recalling every moment of my life in this house. Memories of my daughter as a child, her first steps in the hallway, her laughter echoing from the kitchen as she tried to help me cook. I remembered quiet evenings reading by the fireplace, Christmas mornings where gifts were scattered under the tree, and countless family dinners filled with stories, laughter, and love. This house was not just wood and stone. It was the embodiment of my life. And someone dared to treat it as if it belonged to him. Sleep eluded me. By morning, a plan had already started forming in my mind. It wasn't just about anger, it was about justice, about showing him that arrogance and disrespect have consequences. I wasn't going to fight with words or fists. I had other tools. Tools he would never see coming. The next few days were a delicate balance. I kept up appearances, smiling when he came around, pretending to be harmless and a little old-fashioned. He didn't suspect a thing. But behind that calm exterior, I was making calls, gathering information, and considering every possible angle. I knew exactly who could benefit from my decision, someone whose involvement would shock him completely. The house, my home, had been threatened. But I had something he could never take away: foresight, patience, and the ability to act at the perfect moment. And when the time came, I knew he would never see it coming. It was strange, the sense of power I felt from planning this carefully. I was not young, but experience has its advantages. While he relied on arrogance and assumptions, I had strategy, history, and the moral high ground. And if he truly thought I would just step aside because of a casual insult, he had severely underestimated me. As the week passed, every interaction with him was a test. He would drop comments about the house, laugh casually about his parents moving in, and act as though my presence was merely tolerated. I smiled politely, made small talk, and let him believe he had the upper hand. But inside, I was counting steps, preparing for the moment when he would finally be forced to realize that his sense of ownership over my life was entirely misplaced. On Thursday, I received a call from an old friend, someone I had trusted for decades. We spoke quietly, and by the end of the conversation, I knew the next few days would bring a reckoning, unlike anything he expected. It wasn't about vengeance in the traditional sense. It was about restoring balance, respect, and proving that arrogance cannot dictate the lives of others. I went to bed that night with a calm sense of certainty. The roses outside were ready for morning dew. The house was silent but alive with memories, and I was ready. He had dared to disrespect me, to assume that age and kindness equated to weakness. He would soon learn the difference between underestimating someone and awakening a storm. And when he did, he wouldn't just be surprised. He would be completely unprepared for the truth. After the confrontation, I kept up a facade of calm, greeting my son-in-law with polite smiles whenever he came around, acting as if his words had slid off me like water on glass. But beneath that surface, my mind was a whirlpool of plans, calculations, and possibilities. I had learned long ago that when someone underestimates you, it's not a weakness, it's an opportunity. And he had given me a golden one. I spent the next morning at the local library, poring over property laws and legal procedures. My goal wasn't to start a fight. It was to explore every possible avenue for transferring ownership in a way that would surprise him completely. There are many ways to protect a home, to ensure that those who take it for granted learn a lesson. And as I read, the possibilities began to crystallize. I could see a path, subtle but effective, that would leave him speechless. By noon, I had made my first set of calls. Old friends, colleagues, and even a lawyer I had worked with years ago. I didn't need sympathy or pity. I needed action and knowledge. Each conversation brought a piece of the puzzle together. I learned what documents could be prepared in secret, how transfers could be legally binding, and, most importantly, who could be entrusted with the execution of such a plan. Every step had to be precise. There was no room for error. If he sensed my intentions prematurely, he could manipulate the situation. I couldn't let that happen. Meanwhile, life in the house continued as usual. Or at least, what he perceived as usual. He continued to make offhand remarks about the future of the house, laughing casually about his parents' imminent arrival. Sometimes, he would sit in the living room, idly flipping through books on the shelf, commenting on how outdated they seemed. "These would look better in storage," he'd say. I would smile politely and nod, all the while imagining the perfect moment when he would discover the truth. Every day, I paid attention to his habits, his schedule, and even his small frustrations. He had a tendency to boast about his financial acumen, about how he could manage investments and property better than anyone else. That arrogance, I realized, could be leveraged. It was the foundation on which my plan would stand. While he believed he had control, he was blind to the forces quietly gathering against him. I also took time to reflect on the moral aspect of what I was about to do. This wasn't about spite or anger. It was about respect, justice, and making sure that the lessons of life are learned. He had been given power in the house, and he wielded it with arrogance, forgetting that respect is earned, not assumed. Every step of my plan was a measured response, not a reckless reaction. I wanted him to understand, without a doubt, that underestimating someone who has lived a full life and knows how to act was a grave mistake. By midweek, I had made a decision about the key figure in my plan. This person had no ties to the son, in law, no reason to betray me, and most importantly, would execute the transfer in a way that was legally impeccable. I would not be revealing my intentions directly. This was not a game of confrontation. It was a quiet, invisible strike. The anticipation alone was intoxicating. The idea of seeing him confront a reality he never anticipated made every moment of patience worthwhile. In the meantime, I began to subtly prepare the household. Small changes, almost imperceptible, were made to accommodate my plan. Documents were gathered, old contracts located, and details double-checked. Every piece of the puzzle had to fit perfectly. I even involved my daughter in minor tasks, ensuring she remained unaware of the ultimate plan. There was a certain thrill in knowing that her husband, who believed he controlled the narrative, was entirely oblivious to the threads being woven behind the scenes. I also had to maintain the emotional equilibrium in the house. The son-in-law's presence was increasingly irritating, but I could not let that irritation show. Every interaction had to appear normal, mundane even. He had to believe that he was winning, that he was in charge, and as the days went by, he grew more comfortable in his assumed dominance. That comfort would be his undoing. Confidence built on arrogance is fragile, and it was time to quietly nudge it toward collapse. One afternoon, I received a subtle reminder of why this plan mattered. I caught him in the garden, standing near the roses I had planted decades ago, chatting casually with my daughter about his parents' preferences for the house. "They'll love the guest room," he said, gesturing vaguely at the second floor. "It'll be perfect for them. You'll see, Dad, it's just better this way. You'll be happier with a smaller place anyway." His casual condescension made my blood boil, but I kept my composure, simply adjusting a flower in the garden, as if distracted by the task. It was in these small moments that I realized the extent of his ignorance. He could not perceive the depth of attachment and history embedded in this house. Every brick, every beam held memories and significance that he could not understand. That ignorance, combined with his arrogance, created the perfect conditions for the revelation I was planning. He thought this was a property dispute. In reality, it was a lesson in respect and consequence. Late in the week, I met with my legal contact. The meeting was brief but decisive. Everything was in place. The documents were prepared, the transfer method secured, and the key executor informed. I felt a sense of quiet satisfaction. Years of experience, observation, and patience had led to this moment. I was not just reacting, I was acting strategically. And soon, all the arrogance and dismissal he had shown would confront a reality he had never considered. As Friday approached, I continued the delicate dance. I maintained polite smiles, engaged in superficial conversation, and pretended to be an aging, somewhat forgetful patriarch. He laughed at small jokes, commented on his parents' imminent move, and never suspected that the entire narrative was about to shift beneath his feet. The thrill of anticipation was almost palpable. There was an art to timing, and I intended to execute it perfectly. That evening, I sat in the living room with a cup of tea, looking around at the space I had loved and protected for decades. The house seemed to respond, as if sensing that something monumental was about to happen. I thought of my daughter, her love for this home, and how it had been a place of comfort and growth for her. I also thought of the son-in-law, who had assumed power and control without understanding the weight of responsibility. Soon, he would learn that respect cannot be commanded. It must be acknowledged, and when it is denied, consequences follow. In the quiet of the night, I felt the calm before the storm. Every call made, every document prepared, every small adjustment in the household had been for this moment. The pieces were in place, and all that remained was to act. The anticipation was almost unbearable, but I had learned that patience is a weapon more powerful than rage. He would see it soon enough, and when he did, the expression on his face would be worth every moment of planning, every suppressed emotion, every sleepless night. And so, I waited, smiling quietly to myself, knowing that the arrogance that had once made him feel invincible would soon shatter. In a few short days, he would learn that a lifetime of wisdom and strategy cannot be dismissed with a careless remark. The house, my home, would remain a symbol of life, love, and history, not the property of someone who believed entitlement equated to ownership. And when he finally realized the truth, it would be a lesson he would never forget. The weekend arrived, and with it, a curious tension in the house. My son-in-law moved about with the same smug confidence, but I noticed subtle signs that his ease was beginning to waver. Small things. He kept checking his phone more often, glanced at the mailbox repeatedly, and muttered to himself while reviewing some papers in the living room. It was as though the air itself carried a hint of anticipation, something he couldn't quite place. and that was precisely what I wanted. On Saturday morning, I made what I knew would be the most critical call. I spoke in measured tones, explaining the final details of the plan, confirming that everything was in order. Every contingency had been accounted for, every timing aligned with precision. By the time I hung up, a sense of quiet satisfaction settled over me. It was no longer just planning. The wheels had begun to turn, and the outcome was inevitable. The house, my domain for decades, was about to shift in a way he could never have imagined. That afternoon, he arrived, as usual, carrying himself with the bravado of someone who believed the world was theirs for the taking. He immediately started making remarks about his parents' visit. "We'll need to rearrange the furniture upstairs," he said casually, as if he had the unquestionable right to do so. "Mom will want the guest room closer to the bathroom." "Don't worry, Dad. I'll take care of it." I smiled, nodded, and made a passing comment about checking on some old papers in the study. He hardly noticed. So engrossed was he in imagining the house as a miniature reflection of his family's desires. But little did he know that the study contained more than just documents. It held the key to the revelation he was about to face. Later that day, I went about my errands, keeping a calm exterior while ensuring the final pieces of the plan were in motion. I could feel the subtle changes in the house, the quiet hum of anticipation, as if the walls themselves were aware of what was coming. And all the while, I imagined the look on his face when he finally realized that the control he believed he had was an illusion. That thought alone made the hours stretch in a delicious, slow suspense. By evening, he had begun acting more erratically, though he didn't realize it. Small irritations cropped up, things that would normally go unnoticed. He muttered about paperwork, misplaced items, and the fact that the garden hadn't been watered exactly to his liking. It was as if a shadow of doubt had begun to creep into his mind, an unshakable feeling that something was amiss. I kept my distance, observing quietly, offering only the faintest of smiles when he paused to question something. Patience was everything now. Any misstep could tip him off, and that would ruin the moment I had meticulously prepared. I could almost feel his confidence cracking, each unnoticed detail gnawing at him, though he could not yet identify why. That night, I prepared for the most critical phase. I double-checked the documentation, ensuring every signature, every clause, and every date was correct. The executor of the plan confirmed their readiness, and I knew that by morning, the first move would be completed. The calm before the storm was palpable. I sat in the living room, the familiar furniture casting long shadows in the soft lamplight, and I realized just how much power comes from patience and strategy. Anger and force are fleeting, precision and timing endure. As the night deepened, I reflected on the inevitability of what was about to unfold. My son-in-law had underestimated me from the very first moment he declared I was too old for this house. He believed age and a quiet demeanor equated to weakness. He could not see the years of experience, the wisdom accumulated over decades, and the careful planning that had now come to fruition. Soon, he would understand the cost of arrogance. The following morning, I noticed a subtle shift in his demeanor. He seemed hesitant, almost cautious, as he walked through the living room. His eyes darted around, looking for something invisible. I could not help but smile. The first signs of doubt were manifesting, and all it took was a quiet, unseen hand guiding the course of events. He had begun to feel the consequences of his presumption, without yet understanding them. Later that day, the executor of the plan confirmed completion of the first step. The legal transfer had been initiated, and the paperwork had been processed in a manner completely binding yet completely unexpected. I felt a thrill of quiet satisfaction. He had never suspected a thing. The arrogance that had defined him moments before was now beginning to falter, replaced by an uneasy confusion he could not articulate. That evening he arrived with his usual casual air, unaware that the winds of change were already in motion. He began making more remarks about furniture placement and decor, his voice a little sharper than usual. I listened politely, responding only when necessary, all the while knowing that the revelation would soon confront him directly. The irony was delicious. He believed he was orchestrating life in the house. In reality, the script had been flipped, and he was now a character in a story he could not control. By nightfall, the tension had escalated further. Small details in the household had been subtly altered. Documents placed in conspicuous locations, messages quietly sent, and confirmations received. The entire stage was set. Every step he took, every word he spoke, would now play into the final act of the unfolding drama. And I, the orchestrator, remained calm, smiling quietly, savoring the anticipation. In these moments, I reflected on the nature of control and perception. He had assumed ownership through arrogance, believing that a house is merely a place to live rather than a space filled with life, memories, and respect. Soon, he would discover that true ownership extends beyond possession. It requires understanding, humility, and acknowledgement of history. And for him, this revelation would be startling, transformative, and ultimately unavoidable. The night ended quietly, but in my mind, the final pieces of the puzzle were already aligning. By tomorrow, the consequences of his presumptions would unfold, and he would experience the culmination of every action, every word, and every slight he had delivered. The anticipation was not about revenge in a petty sense. It was about restoring balance, about demonstrating that underestimation can have consequences far beyond what is visible. And so, as I turned off the lamp and watched the shadows stretch across the familiar walls, I knew that the twist, the moment he would realize his miscalculation, was closer than ever. The calm patience, the careful orchestration, and the quiet confidence of experience had all led to this point. The stage was set, and the final act was about to begin. The morning air felt heavier than usual, charged with an anticipation that neither of us could ignore. My son-in-law arrived, carrying his usual confident smile, but it was slightly strained, as if he already sensed that something had shifted. I greeted him with a calm nod, as if nothing had changed. But inside, I felt a quiet thrill. The moment we had been building toward was finally here. He started the day by checking the mailbox, expecting the usual bills and advertisements. Instead, he found an official notice, a legally binding document confirming the transfer of the house. His eyebrows shot up, his confident demeanor faltering for the first time in weeks. He read the notice again, then slowly looked up at me, confusion and disbelief etching deep lines across his face. What is this?" he stammered. This can't be right. You can't." I interrupted softly, letting a calm, controlled smile spread across my face. "I already told you, it's not about anger or revenge. It's about respect, and it seems that part has been missing." His hands shook slightly as he held the papers, and for the first time, I saw real fear in his eyes. "But this is my parents' house! My family!" "How?" I gestured toward the executor of the transfer, who had arrived quietly earlier in the day, and who now stood firmly beside me. "The house isn't yours to dictate, and it never has been. It belongs to someone who understands the meaning of home, history, and respect. Someone who would never presume to dismiss another's life so casually." He looked around, his mouth opening and closing as though trying to form words that failed to come out. Every smirk, every arrogant comment, every casual dismissal of my presence had led to this moment. And now, the reality of what had happened hit him like a wave, unstoppable and unrelenting. My daughter arrived shortly after, drawn by the tension and the raised voices. She stopped abruptly in the doorway, her eyes scanning the scene. What happened?" she asked, a mixture of fear and curiosity in her voice. I stepped forward, handing her a copy of the document. "Read for yourself," I said simply. Her eyes widened as she scanned the pages, and then slowly, comprehension dawned. She turned toward her husband, who now looked smaller, deflated, and utterly unprepared for the consequences of his arrogance. You transferred it?" he whispered, disbelief turning into panic. "How, why? Who?" I let the silence stretch for a moment, giving him space to feel the weight of his misjudgment. "I made a decision," I said calmly, "to ensure that this house, and everything it represents, is respected. I involved someone whose intentions are pure, someone whose actions are guided by understanding rather than entitlement. And the house is no longer under your control." He sank into a chair, running a hand through his hair in frustration. I could see the realization forming in his mind. Every casual insult, every attempt to assert dominance, had led to this exact moment of humiliation and shock. His parents' imminent arrival, the future he had imagined, and the sense of ownership he believed he held, all crumbling at once. My daughter moved closer to me, placing a reassuring hand on my shoulder. "Dade, I didn't know you were planning this," she said softly, pride and relief mingling in her voice. "It's perfect. He needed to understand. He needed to see this." I nodded, letting her words sink in. "Sometimes," I said, "lessons are learned not through argument but through consequence." He assumed, he presumed, and he disregarded respect. Now, he experiences what it truly means to misjudge someone's life and legacy. The son-in-law looked up, finally able to speak, though his voice was tinged with panic and humiliation. This isn't fair!" I held up a hand. "Fairness isn't about what you assume you are owed. Fairness is about honoring life, effort, and history. You will find your way. But remember this feeling. Remember what happens when arrogance blinds you to truth and respect." He stared at me, swallowing hard, the magnitude of the lesson slowly settling in. For the first time, I saw him humbled, stripped of the conceit that had guided him for weeks. The power dynamic had shifted completely, and I could finally exhale. The tension that had built for days, the weeks of planning, and the anticipation of this moment had all converged to reveal the truth. Respect is not granted lightly, and it cannot be stolen. My daughter reached out to me again, squeezing my hand gently. "You've always known what to do," she said quietly. "I'm proud of you." He needed this lesson more than he realizes. I looked around the room, taking in the house, the memories etched into every corner, and the faces of the two people I loved most. The house was still alive with history, with laughter and love. It was exactly as it should be. Not under the control of someone who thought entitlement could replace respect, but under the guidance of someone who understood the true value of home. The son-in-law remained seated, staring at the papers in disbelief. The humiliation was complete, the arrogance finally shattered. And though I felt no joy in his discomfort, I felt a deep satisfaction in restoring balance and ensuring that respect, history, and wisdom were honored. The lesson had been delivered. The twist had revealed itself in full force. And in that quiet, victorious moment, I realized that patience, strategy, and understanding one's own worth were more powerful than any confrontation or argument. He would remember this day for the rest of his life, and I hoped that, in time, he would learn humility and the importance of respecting those who came before him. For now, the house stood as it always had, alive with memories and dignity, a silent witness to a lesson learned and a boundary firmly restored. The day after the revelation was strangely calm. The storm had passed, leaving in its wake a quiet sense of balance and clarity. My son, In-law moved about the house with a humbled demeanor. Avoiding eye contact, his arrogance completely dissolved. It was as though the weight of the lesson had finally settled on his shoulders. I watched him from a distance, noting how differently he carried himself, how he seemed smaller in the space he once assumed was entirely his. My daughter and I spent the morning together, walking through the garden and reminiscing about past memories. The roses bloomed in defiance of the tension that had gripped the house just days before. "I'm glad you handled it this way," she said softly, her eyes reflecting pride and relief. He needed to understand, and now he will. He'll remember this forever. I nodded, taking a deep breath of the crisp morning air. "Sometimes," I said, "lessons must be learned the hard way, not through anger or confrontation, but through consequence." He's not just learning about the house. He's learning about respect, humility, and the value of history. The son, in-law, avoided us for most of the morning, likely nursing his bruised ego and attempting to process what had happened. When he finally spoke, his voice was quieter, almost cautious. I didn't understand. I thought." He trailed off, unsure of how to finish the sentence. "You thought ownership meant entitlement," I said gently. "You thought being part of a family gave you control. But it doesn't. Respect is earned, understanding is cultivated, and history cannot be rewritten to suit one's convenience." He nodded slowly, finally seeming to grasp a portion of the lesson. It was a start. I didn't need a full apology or immediate reconciliation. The recognition of his mistake was enough for now. Humility is not instantaneous, and arrogance is rarely dismantled in a single moment. But the seed had been planted, and the path toward understanding had begun. Over the next few days, life returned to a sense of normalcy. The house felt lighter, freer. I spent my mornings in the study, surrounded by memories, old books, and photographs, while my daughter took time to organize family albums. Even the son, in-law, began to help around the house in small ways, his gestures tentative but genuine. It was clear he was attempting to rebuild some semblance of respect, though I made no demands. He had learned the lesson through experience, and experience is often a far more effective teacher than words alone. One afternoon, I received a quiet note from the executor of the transfer, confirming that everything had been finalized. The house was now officially in the hands of someone who valued its history, its memories, and the people who had lived within it. A sense of closure settled over me. This wasn't just about legal ownership. It was about ensuring that the legacy of this home, the life it had held, would be respected and preserved. That evening, my daughter and I sat together in the living room, sipping tea and watching the sun cast long shadows across the familiar furniture. "It feels right," she said softly, "like the house is breathing again, like it's happy." I smiled, feeling a deep sense of satisfaction. "It is right," I said. "Respect has been restored, boundaries have been acknowledged, and the arrogance that threatened it all has been humbled. Sometimes, that is all one can hope for." As the days passed, the son-in-law gradually accepted his new reality. He no longer acted as if he owned the space. Instead, he began to approach interactions with thoughtfulness and caution. While he may never fully admit his mistakes, his behavior reflected a shift in understanding. That was sufficient. The house remained a place of warmth and history, a sanctuary where lessons had been learned and respect reclaimed. I also took time to reflect on the experience personally. It was a reminder that age and experience carry a power that is often underestimated by the young and arrogant. Patience, strategy, and understanding one's worth are tools that can achieve far more than rash anger or confrontation. The entire ordeal reinforced a truth. I had always known life's lessons are best delivered through action, not words, and sometimes the quietest measures yield the most profound results. In the evenings, I often found myself walking through the garden, touching the roses I had planted so many years ago, and thinking about the resilience of both life and human dignity. The house, with all its history, remained a testament to that resilience. It had survived disrespect, arrogance, and the presumption of entitlement, and it had emerged stronger, cherished, and rightly guided. The son-in-law, though still learning humility, now recognized the boundaries of his role. He no longer issued commands, nor did he attempt to assert control where it was not his to claim. That subtle shift in behavior was more powerful than any confrontation, more enduring than any argument. Respect had been restored, and with it, a sense of balance returned to the household. And through it all, my daughter and I shared quiet moments of understanding, knowing that while the lesson had been harsh, it had been necessary. The house was more than walls and furniture. It was life, history, and legacy. And now, that legacy was secured, honored, and respected in a way that would endure far beyond any moment of arrogance or misunderstanding. Finally, I sat in the living room one evening, reflecting on the events that had unfolded. The house was quiet, bathed in the warm glow of the setting sun. I felt a profound sense of peace. The storm had passed, the lesson had been delivered, and the integrity of the home, and the values it represented, remained intact. The experience reminded me that life often requires patience, strategy, and a calm understanding of one's own strength. And when those qualities are employed wisely, the outcome can be profoundly satisfying, both for oneself and for those who share in the legacy of a life well lived.